welcome to another edition of the PRC Podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 6. My name is Jake, and I'm your host. My associate and co-host Ryan of RJM Analytics is with us as usual, and making his second appearance on the show is Brian T, aka Chad's Hair Plugs from our community. Now, Brian has been with us before to talk F1 in our special season review from 2022, but this will be his first time talking NASCAR here. We're looking forward to hearing that and getting a new perspective here. But in the meantime, we've had, in the last 2 weeks, a not really dirt race and another short track event at Martinsville, which I've got, shall we say, a few things to comment on involving both of them. But first, I'll let my colleagues kick things off by talking about, well, whatever they want to. So, Ryan, you get us started.
Yeah, I mentioned last time that I was going to the Bristol dirt race, and I enjoyed it, in spite of the kind of anticlimactic ending. And, of course, as I sort of predicted on here, that Christopher Bell would make me look stupid. Finally, congratulations on leading the most laps in a race for the first time ever, and doing it not even by taking the lead on track. So, no, I thought it was a good race, though. There's a lot of people who sort of just have this preset, anti-Bristol dirt because, and I agree that the regular track is better, but we're just kind of a novelty thing, it is what it is, and it was definitely a fun experience to be there, and I know they probably won't bring it back next year, so I don't know, maybe they go to like a real dirt track or something, but I'm definitely glad I went, and thought mostly it was a pretty good race. It was just kind of the inconsistency with, what they called a caution for and what they didn't, and then, the bullshit at the end, which it was like Kyle Busch was on pit road and they threw a caution for that, and then on the restart, like, Blaney gets spun and nothing, and then something happens on the last lap and they call it. So I couldn't even really see everything that was going on from where I was sitting, but like I said, I enjoyed it. And then this past week we'll talk about later, but I thought that was also, despite all the Twitter ranting and everybody being unhappy with it, I thought that was, not great, but at least decent.
Okay, I'll punch in. Didn't get to see the Bristol Dirt Race live, unfortunately. I had Easter obligations, but I was able to catch most of it on Monday. And the overall impressions for both the Bristol Dirt Race and the Martinsville race on Sunday was that there's room for improvement, but it was better than both of their 2022 races, in my opinion. I mean, the ending for the Bristol Dirt Race in 2022 was, of course, amazing, or just wacky, but it seemed like the drivers, for the most part, know what they're doing more on the dirt than they used to. And in Martinsville, it wasn't as much of a procession as it was last year, but it was still a bit of a procession, at least until the sun came out.
Yeah, I think that definitely made a big difference having, speaking from experience from last year's Martinsville spring race, obviously, it was definitely better than that. I think that's pretty, non-debatable. It's hard to be worse than that race was, and there was a decent amount of, strategy mix-up, and, I mean, like I said, we'll get to it later, but it seems like, the different strategies late in the race, and even though there was that caution in the middle of pit stops that, as I've made no secret, always annoys me when that happens because it really screws up the metrics and all that, but it at least, gave us guys the opportunity to drive through the field, and Kyle Larson on that last restart came from like fifth to win it. I think Bristol was maybe slightly a step back from last year's race, but on the plus side, no rain delays this time, and definitely going by what the forecast looked like it was supposed to be. That is a huge sigh of relief. Actually, last weekend, both of the last 2 weekends, we kind of dodged the bullets there, so just kind of looking for any positive takeaways I can here.
Yeah, I'll go then. well, I'll get into more specific things about both the races in a little bit. But as far as the overall product goes, Bristol, I've made no secret of it. I'm not a fan of that race because, for one thing, the main thing, as Ryan was pointing out, was that it's taking away a race from one of the best tracks on the circuit, which, even though last year's Bristol night race wasn't so great, it has been a consistent performer that been one of the best tracks, if not the best track on the schedule for many years now. And I don't want to see a race taken away from that. But you could argue that that makes the night race even more special and a bigger deal. I can see that argument, but I'd still rather have two races at the good track. But anyways, and also the fact I'm just not into dirt. I never have been. You could probably count on the fingers of my hands the amount of dirt races I've actually watched voluntarily that didn't have to do with the NASCAR Cup race or SRX or whatever. I just think asphalt racing just vastly superior in every way, and that's why it overtook dirt as the main thing. But that's not what we're here to talk about. As far as how it compared to the previous two races, I think it was about the same. Wasn't bad, wasn't great either. The thing that really has hurt all of these dirt races that we've had, is just the lack of flow, just the constant caution flags and stoppages for whatever reason it is. We didn't have any weather issues this time, thankfully, but we had them last year, and there was, as Ryan was pointing out, the inconsistency with the officiating, where we just kept having these cautions for things that probably shouldn't have been, like Michael McDowell having a spin where he hit absolutely nothing and got going in like half a second. But then we had some instance later.
Actually, that one, I'll just quickly interrupt here, but I think this might have been another case of Fox just not showing everything. But that first McDowell spin, Brad Keselowski stopped on the track behind him for 10 seconds. So
okay,
that was a legit caution.
All right, that explains it.
Well, all right. Well, maybe not the second time that he went that McDowell did a 360 then. Maybe that's the one I was thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, later on, we had some incidents where they should have been cautions, but we'd already had so many, and the race had been stopped so many times where I guess there's no other explanation for it other than they figured they'd already had enough and they didn't want to have to slow the race down again, so they just kept going. But then they contradict themselves again with the caution flag that, as Ryan pointed out, came from Kyle Busch spinning and basically ending up on pit road, had no effect on the track whatsoever, and that kind of, you could argue, screwed up the results a bit, but it's just the event as a whole, I'm not just talking about this year, just kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I know that a lot of people will disagree with this, but just the idea of having this race on Easter and having it on Sunday evening, it just kind of felt like a thing where no one really wants to be there and do it. Each of the years we've been here, it's almost kind of like an afterthought. People just want to get it over with. And for a variety of reasons, not just bias reasons, I was glad for this race to be over. And that doesn't mean it was bad, but the thing about it is, when the racing was actually going, it wasn't bad, but the thing I don't like about it is that track position is even more of a thing or a problem than it is on most racetracks. You didn't see a lot of guys going up from 25th and driving up through the field, or 20th or even 15th and going up, as evidenced by the bell thing. Pretty much whoever got the lead on so-and-so sequence was going to be the one that commanded the race, and that's exactly what happened. And so it was all right, but the conjecture is that it will not be back next year, which I don't, as I think I might have said before, NASCAR really didn't want this race to begin with, and I'm not sure that the track really wanted it either, but Fox, in their infinite wisdom, pushed really hard for it. But it looks like the writing is on the wall that it's not going to be back next year, and if that's the case, I'd be pretty glad of it.
Mm-hmm. You kind of touched on it, but that kind of reminded me of something I wanted to bring up today, which is both the Bristol Dirt Race and this past Sunday. It seemed like everybody knew it was all going to be about track position more than fresh tires for the most part, and yet how many guys did we actually see stay out under a caution after a decent amount of laps are on the tires. At Bristol, it was like 4 guys at the end of the first stage and then 6 guys at the end of the second stage. And what do you know? They all stayed up there. And then Sunday, it was literally just Ross Chastain went from 25th to 1st under one of those early cautions and stayed up there and got like top 5 or 6 in the stage and was up around 10th the whole rest of the race. And then toward the end of the race, even that caution that came out after most people had pitted and a couple guys hadn't yet, Kevin Harvick, who would have been leading the race, not that I'm shedding any tears, and I know Jake isn't, he comes to pit road. Hamlin, who I'm certainly not disappointed about there, he pits, would have been second, and lo and behold, it was Chase Briscoe who stayed out. Probably would have won the race if it had gone green afterwards, but then we had the J.J. Yeley caution. The 2009 Formula One champion J.J. Yeley brings out a caution, and once again, barely anybody stays out, and the guys who did, I think they all hung on for, Logano was one of them, and he finished second after having a 25th place car. I forgot who the others were, but I know they all finished much better than they would have otherwise. So, we just see time and time again these, especially on the short tracks, it seems like, where track position is pretty much the most important thing, and yet these idiot crew chiefs just continue to pit every single opportunity they can, and it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I'll let Brian chime in, then I'll speak on that.
I was baffled too by the the Alfredo caution, where that's basically how the likes of
that was the one in the middle of pit stops.
Yeah, that was one in the middle of pit stops. I was confounded by the guys who where they have like 10 laps most on their tires decided to come back and get more. Mm-hmm. They could have, on top of that, you also pin all the guys who were decent throughout the day that, or at least a lap down now, you keep them off the track or keep them out of contention for winning, which is a really weird decision.
Yeah, I think the biggest one was at the Bristol Dirt Race. Ty Dillon, of all people, who would have been, he was like running his usual 30th or whatever, stays out, jumps up to 4th, and I'm pretty sure he got a top 10 in that stage. Or if not, he was like right outside it. So it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, as far as the race goes, I was getting ready to just make my general comments on that. The race, it was fine. It wasn't anything amazing, but it was definitely pretty much what I predicted, actually, which was that it was better, obviously, than last year's spring race, and it was better than the fall race also, which really was not much of a race until the last 30 laps. And it was better than Phoenix this year with this new package, and not as good as Richmond, which is exactly, not to toot my own horn, but that's pretty much what I said would happen on the last show. And, I've got conflicted feelings on it, I think, as we all do, because on one hand, again, it wasn't the best race, and track position was still probably too much of a factor, and we would have liked to have seen more action up front and more tires mattering. But you've had all this hand-wringing that has come out from various groups of people, and some not in the sport and some in the sport, about how the racing product sucks, and, there was no passing, and it was impossible, and you couldn't do anything, and, it's like, it goes back to what we've talked about many times, is people don't have any nuance whatsoever. They don't seem to, because, there is a middle ground between saying that, yes, this race was far from perfect, and there's things that need to be improved on, but it also was not this terrible event that people are making out where there was absolutely nothing going on. And I'll bring the statistic up. Now, I want to point out that this number was inflated by the fact that we had some rare green flag pit stops in Martinsville, and that always kind of screws it up. And despite the point of what we're trying to do here, raw numbers are not everything. The eye test does matter. But the fact is, this race had a little over 2,000 green flag passes, and we averaged almost 6 a lap. That was the most green flag passes at a Martinsville race since spring of 2015. After the last race, which had the least, the fall race last year, I actually was really surprised to see this, had less than 700 passes, less than 2 a lap. And so that was a big, big jump, and that, especially considering that this race was shorter, which, that's a whole other thing that we're not going to get into, but we've ran about in the past, this race being 400 instead of 500 laps. But, you add that in, and it certainly was not as bad as people made out. And it was kind of also a thing where when the sun was out, it was a better race. When it was cloudy, you didn't see as much action, I guess, because the track was not as greasy, and there was too much grip on the track, I guess you could say, when they got the rubber laid down in the grooves, and it was kind of harder to have 2 lanes of racing. But at the end, there was passing. You could do it. Like we saw Martin Truex make a bunch of spots at the end after he finally got his car handling well. We saw Chase Elliott, to bring him up in his return, go from 20th all the way to 10th on the last run. Kyle Larson, as Ryan mentioned, went from 4th to the lead on the last one. So you could pass. It just, the circumstances had to be right, had to be the right situation. It was an improvement for sure, but there's still work that needs to be done, which it's a dead horse at this point, but they really need to find a way to get rid of shifting at this track, because that's what's killing it, because more than anything. And even Denny has said this. That's one thing I agree with him on, is that anytime that you go in the corner, one of the things that creates passing in Martinsville is the fact that you have a guy that might go in too deep to the corner, or he might gun the gas a little bit too fast, and get loose off on the exit. You can count on guys doing that, and the other guy taking advantage and making a pass without necessarily having to get physical. But with the package the way it is now, these guys, they're just downshifting or upshifting anytime they get into trouble, and that's why you can see it's almost like this bubble that you can't break through, where you can't gain on a guy going off the corner. The guy in front always gets the better run off, because it's almost like there's a wall there. Like it's not an intermediate track, it's a short track, and it's not really an arrow thing, but it's the same kind of principle, and that's the thing that needs to really be fixed. Other than that, I don't really think a whole lot needs to be changed. It's just one of those things where not every race is going to be a classic, and Martinsville is a particularly temperamental track when it comes to the racing quality, and that's, I don't think you could have asked much more realistically from it, but there's work to be done. I didn't have a huge problem with it, though.
Yeah, I will always pine for the early 2010s Martinsville, which, in my opinion, was the best track consistently on the schedule at that time, and maybe the best stretch of racing at one track that I've seen over such a prolonged time span of any track in my time watching NASCAR. Every single race from around 2011-ish through probably 2014 or 15 was just an instant classic there. Yeah. And but that being said, every race doesn't have to be awesome, unforgettable barn burner, And that's the thing that I think we've been over it, but these younger fans today especially just seems like don't, and you see it, it's not just a racing thing or even a sports thing. It's, look at all the movies that come out today, just all these nonstop action types of, blowing things up and everything. It's all just to capture people's attention and keep them entertained, and there's no art to it. NASCAR used to be, you would have it's the people who want the shorter races. It's the people who complain about too many long green flag runs, and just they're never happy with anything because they want just nonstop action every single lap, edge of your seat, and that's not what this is supposed to be. There's an art to it, and there's a strategy to it that, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and you have to be able to appreciate that. And it just seems like people, they just don't understand that. They just want all these, bunch up the field all the time and lead changes every lap. And it's like, the other thing is, if they somehow did that and we somehow got like racing at Bristol where there were 50 lead changes or something like that, they would say it's too random. and they would say it takes no skill to get to the front. You could have what we had at the plate racing with the tandems and stuff, and I hated that because it was like David Reagan or Trevor Bayne could get pushed to the win by not even doing anything, and it just took no skill basically. And so I think, like Jake said, there's work to be done, but chill out, people.
Yeah, it's like we've kind of got a running joke in our community where every time that a race happens that people are not a huge fan of because of the package or the rules or whatever, it's a guarantee that there's going to be clips of the Chicagoland 2014 race that are posted, and there's going to be a big argument over it about horsepower and all this other crap that goes on, and it's this way every time. It's the same thing. And you actually brought up something that I was going to say, but I kind of forgot about. This race, let's not kid ourselves, a lot more people would have loved this race if we had just had more incidents and more cautions and more restarts to bunch things up. But the fact is that this was the third straight race. All three of these Gen 7 races of Martinsville have been very clean. This was another extremely clean race for a short track. There were only 3 cautions for cause, and only 2 of them were for one-car incidents, literally. There were no major wrecks or crashes or incidents like that. And so we just had a lot of green flag running, and personally, I'm fine with that. I would rather see that if the racing's good. Like I said, I don't have a problem with having a fair amount of cautions either if it's the result of good racing. But if the product is good, I would much rather see that than see these guys putzing around every 20 minutes and having to wait, go through another pit stop and all these caution laps for the cleanup stuff or whatever. I'd much rather see that. That's vastly preferable, in my opinion. I'll let, I guess, Brian chime in one last time, and then we'll kind of get to specific drivers. I've got my one thing I kind of got to get out of the way, and then you guys can go on whatever with your analytics.
I was just going to add in real quick. I'm sorry, Ryan.
No. I was just going to say let you talk, but just because our names sound so similar, just call him Chad, all right?
All right, I'm Chad from Noah. Yippee.
All right.
I got hair now.
Yeah.
I was going to bring back that shifting. Isn't it like something that they just have to do with gear ratios? Because it seems like it's a pretty easy fix. It's not something that's going to take tons of R&D or tons of money from each of the teams to change. Like NASCAR, requires the gear ratios for either each race or for each package. I think it's something that's pretty easy to do for Martinsville.
The gear ratios. Sorry, go ahead.
Remember when NASCAR, I think it was the mid 2000s, they started requiring certain gear ratios so that teams wouldn't be either R&Ding or blowing up 20 engines a year. I think within a year or two, they figured out, and I mean totally different track, but Pocono went from shifting every lap to no shifting, just because they required a certain gear ratio, as compared to the other intermediate or long tracks like Indy or restrictor plates.
Yeah, the gear ratio, to clarify, they instituted what was called the gear rule in 2005. And basically, what it means is the same thing as F1 has done ever since the hybrid era, where basically it's a lock differential. You basically have about 2 options or choices of what you can do with gears, and they're both very close together. Used to be before that, teams could kind of run whatever gear that they wanted within reason. They could do, they could go not crazy, but a little bit outside the box. But since 2005, you cannot really do much. Everyone is pretty much running just about the same thing.
And now they can do it electronically with the CPUs. They don't even have to deal with the old crankshafts or the old stuff that they had to do with transmissions and such.
Yeah, and another thing, they have 5 gears now, which is the other thing with this new car. The old one had 4, but at Martinsville, they're not actually using the 5th gear unless you're Ross last year. They're running primarily in 4th and downshifting to 3rd, then shifting back up to 4th, which I'm not sure exactly what the fix for that would be, but, I'm sure it's something that they could pull off. And I guess if there's enough backlash to it, they'll probably do it. That's kind of been the trend recently. If they get enough negative feedback, they eventually do change it, but we're just going to have to wait and see.
I don't know a complete about of engineering, but I think what they basically needs to run something low so that when you go back down the gear to try to either catch your over or under braking or trying to get back up, that the RPM stays low enough so that you can't either automatically quick fix your problem or go up or get enough RPM that you already can, mash the gas and get back up to speed as quickly as you used to, which would, I hope, create more passing opportunities. Or let the cream rise to the top, whatever the case may be.
I'm no engineering expert or anything like that, but I did want to really quick before we change topics to whatever. I was going to just talk about something Jake mentioned, but it's like so much of this, I'm seeing so much anti-Gen 7 stuff now on Twitter, like the car race is bad, and it just like it seems like so much of this is just a product of this whole, herd mentality, especially on Twitter. And it's like if maybe one or two of the influential posters, whether it's like Black Flags Matter or that Denny delivers or just those types of people, Iceberg,
or even
if
Clint
like
Boyer
one or
this
two
week.
of them, yeah, if like any of them say something is bad, then everybody just swallows it up and repeats it, and all of a sudden it's bad. It just felt like for so long last year, for like maybe 2/3 of the season, everybody was raving about how great this car was, and at least the way it raced. It had the other issues with being too fragile and the injuries, but everybody said it raced really well. And now all of a sudden, just a few influential people decided that it sucks, so now it sucks. Just like, in 2019, people for the most part liked the 550 package and the way it raced on intermediates, and then, had one bad race, and all of a sudden everybody hated it to like a point where you can't even say anything good about something once the mob decides that it sucks. It's just, there's this total stigma that gets created where, you have to basically just fall in line, or like I know Jake, for instance, made some Reddit post praising the 550 package on intermediates, and it literally got deleted because it didn't fall in line with.
I was literally just about to bring that up.
It's just, it's like the same way you see in sports when, after a year or two, if a team isn't winning with a new coach, then a few people decide the coach sucks, and then everybody becomes afraid to say anything good about them. It's just this product of, social media culture, and I just, think for yourselves, people. All right, I guess that's what I'm trying to say here. Treat everybody, every race needs to be treated individually instead of just, if one race is bad, then the whole thing sucks.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add because you said it perfectly.
Yep.
Well, I guess I'll get my little thing here out of the way, and then I'll try to stay out of the way for the rest of it. But as far as we'll get to actual drivers and some of their performances now. As you guys know, I try not to be obnoxious about it, but I am kind of a Kyle Larson stan. You could say, I mean, I don't just love him, but nothing will ever be like Junior for me in the past was. But he's one of my co-favorites, I guess you could say. And let's just say that there was extra satisfaction to this win for several reasons, but one reason in particular. Let's see here. I'm trying to. Really, that's all that needs to be said, but I guess I'll add to it. Yes, I won't go on too long about it because enough was already said about it at the time. But yeah, they had their get-togethers in Bristol Dirt, and it was just I hadn't frankly ever seen anything like it before. Just this sudden bandwagon of people just bashing the shit out of Kyle Larson after that race. Like it was truly something amazing because, like, in 9 years of watching, I mean, I know that there's been people that have criticized him and have said bad things about him, and he's gotten on some people's nerves. I know that it has happened. There's been instances of it, but I just can't remember it off the top of my head. But after 9 years of never really hearing anything about Kyle Larson being a dirty driver or being bad with his conduct, he's always seemed to have a very good reputation on the track as a very fair racer. suddenly it was like he was the Antichrist. Just absolutely a disgrace to the sport. Like I don't really have a good way to put it, but the hate was palpable. I mean, it was worse than Chastain, frankly. And the amount of people that are just siding with, which, look, it's okay to root for the underdog. I'm not automatically bashing anybody that likes Ryan Preece. People can like who they like, and they can have legitimate reasons for it. I'm not trying to be an elitist here and say that you can't root for someone that's not necessarily the greatest driver. But the fact is that this is a career 25th place at best driver that has been running his mouth ever since Coda about respect and other guys and how they race.
Charlotte last year, really.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that too. Even though he's been the one that's been causing a lot of these incidents, just like at Coda, and gotten this almost like this big cult of fans and people behind him that think he can do no wrong. I think he's just this hero. I mean, even Denny was talking about his podcast where he was suddenly saying that Kyle was a dirty driver. He said because he literally brought up a case where he ran him into the grass one year at the Glen, and he said because of that he's a dirty driver. That you have to. But he doesn't. If you are in a corner or coming out of a corner, he's going to make you lift, and you're either going to lift or you're going to wreck. And I don't know. I guess he's still salty about Vegas and what happened with his driver Bubba last year or whatever. In addition to the fact that Larson's got a title and he doesn't, I don't know. But it was a hell of a week for Larson. I mean, he murdered Preece's family and he won at a new track. I mean, I don't know what else to say. But and I could tell that after it happened, he was really pissed because his interview. It's not often that you see him really kind of get temperamental, and he didn't really do it this time. But there was that one little clip where somebody just basically shoved a microphone right into his Adam's apple and said, "Get that thing out of my fucking face," and all that. And then afterwards, he was saying that can we just grow up and get the F over it? And I'm sure he got really sick of hearing about that and Preece being praised. And then it looked like it was going to get even worse when Preece won the pole, and as a result of SHR suddenly finding speed, which I'm sure one of you guys will chime on in a minute.
Just on the short tracks.
Yeah, and
the flat track.
Yeah, and because he had the track position, he dominated the early part of the race. But then, and I'm going to toot my own horn again. I was literally saying in the chat during the middle of the race, well, I'm sure he's going to speed at some point in the pits and probably end up running 20th the rest of the event. And about 10 minutes later, a caution came out. I think it was the stage caution or whatever came out. And sure enough, he just booked it trying to get out of pit road to be first out. And
I think it was the Burton caution, right?
That was it was in the middle of the second stage.
Yeah,
and
130.
And he sped, and he ran 20th for most of the rest of the race. Finished 15th, but that was the end of his winning run. And then Larson, just responded like the champion that he is. He doesn't have to run his mouth or say anything or make a big deal of it. He just got his revenge the best he can by winning, and he silenced everyone. And there's no more talk about Preece owning him now. So that's all that needs to be said.
Yeah, it's hard to think of, the last driver who is as mediocre would even be putting it nicely. I mean, this is a guy who, for 3 years, was getting his ass kicked by Ricky Stenhouse and Chris Buescher, who are not exactly world beaters. And people treat him like he's this cup rookie or, this untapped potential prospect as if, just because, I guess he made it up had a harder way of making it up than most other guys. But it's like he just has such an entitled attitude for a driver as below average as he is. It's like it's got to be his teammate, certain Karen Harvick, rubbing off on him, I guess. But it's like he thinks he owns the damn track, and anything that ever happens is always someone else's fault, and guys just race with no respect. But then he pulls what he did at Larson at the Bristol Dirt Race, just intentionally wrecks Kyle Larson and basically tries to make an excuse for it. And it's like, dude, just know your place. If you're actually good enough to win races, then I can kind of get being that cocky, but it's, yeah. And then that at Martinsville, what happened when he sped on pit road, completely blatant speeding just to try to not lose the lead. That was definitely a classic karma moment there. So,
Yeah, before Brian speaks, I'll just kind of say, there does seem to be, and I think most of it is jealousy because of, the other guys wish they could be as good as Larson is, but also, there seems to be this thing where people get particularly enraged when he does something like Bubba last year, and I think maybe part of it is because he's like 3 feet tall and 120 pounds or whatever he is, and I guess they think that they can just, and the fact that he's also meek on top of that, and they can do whatever they want, and he's not going to respond, and they're probably right. But like I said, he doesn't have to really respond because he just beats them fair and the way you should. So,
yeah, I'm not even a Larson fan really, but or at least not ever since he became Chase's teammate. But it's like there's fewer guys in the sport who I think are better at handling, people just losing their shit at him, whether it's Bubba last year or Preece, really anything. He just takes it very professionally and just lets it all out on the track and let that do his talking.
Yeah, well, we all remember the 2014 incident at Newman where he just absolutely punted him just to make it in the chase. And then even an example like last year at Kansas where he was racing Kurt Busch really hard. And, he kind of was overdriving his car trying to win the race and beat him head-to-head. And he hit the wall. And his spotter was egging him on and trying to blame it on Kurt. And, he said, no, it wasn't his fault. It was me. And, that's the kind of stuff that tells you about a driver and, their integrity. And that's what I admire about them. But I'll try to stop whatting over him, and I'll let Brian speak now.
Thank you. Or Chad.
Yeah.
Sorry, I keep saying it.
Yeah.
It's in my head now.
I know. So. Yeah. I wonder in the case of Larson if it's last decade or so, all the dirt races that none of us watch on a regular basis that he attends and races in, that the guy who gets gunned for, whether it's because he's like the big name or because, hey, if I bump into Larson, if I race him hard, he'll give me a chance in the big leagues, or if I get into a fight with him, it'll get viral, and I'll, because. And back, going over to Preece is like a career modified guy, really. I know he's been in Cup here and there, and he's had some Xfinity racing, but largely he's a modified guy, and it seems like he has that, trying to use that underdog, hey, if I get Larson and me, I'll be more famous, and I can get some damn sponsors besides Haas on the 41 car, and, people start paying attention to me.
Well, I think part of that is because he's from Connecticut. We all know about the drivers from there, but but seriously.
I think I
think he's the only guy I like from Connecticut.
Parker Kligerman.
That's what I said. I think he's the only guy from Connecticut that I like, as far as drivers go.
Oh, I didn't hear that part.
All right.
I wasn't.
He's the exception.
Were we going to just talk about analytics now, or?
Yeah, you go ahead.
At least me. So there is actually something I was meaning to bring up, which was the new statistic that I made a couple weeks ago. I think it's basically combining running position and some of the passing stuff. I'm calling it XARP, expected average running position. So I changed the formula for that, and having now tested that out, I think I will be making kind of some wholesale changes in terms of acing other things on that rather than regular average running position, which might take a while, but I'm trying to get the most accurate metric that I possibly can. So eventually I'm going to have to go back and redo all the old races, but for now I think I'm just going to focus on this season and doing that, and also discovering a error that I made at the Austin metrics, where I accidentally used the wrong thing to multiply. Having now fixed all that, we have a new season leader in TDR, and that's Tyler Reddick. Almost solely because his score now at Austin is a whopping 441.23, which is the first plus 400 score since Kyle Larson at Nashville in 2021. Highest total since, of course, all these old season metrics are now outdated, but let me take a look. Yeah, it is the highest since at least 2016, since I haven't done 2015 or the couple years before that yet, but it was, I mean, Sean, when he was on here a couple weeks ago, said it was the most dominant, like the first time drivers ever had like a 5-0 lead change record on a road course. It was, pretty much any way you slice it, one of the most dominant performances in the last couple years. Although part of that, in my case, was because of the teammate comparison with Bubba that day, who crashed out early and ran last, or close to last. But yeah, anyway, I'm sure I would not say Reddick has had the best season so far, but I think it's very close between he, Byron, and Larson. And I have also said that due to the how good his passing numbers have been and how much he's just not really been put in good track position situations for a lot of it, I think by the end of the season he's going to be the clear number one guy.
Yeah, so far this season it's pretty much went about how we predicted. Like, we've stated several times that I think the clear three best drivers in the sport are Chase, Larson, and Reddick. And in the absence of Chase for the weeks where he was out with the injury, Byron's kind of taken his place, where he's being carried a little bit by his car and his crew chief, of course, but still he's performed very well this year, and this is probably the best that he's done so far. He's had some dominant performances, and he's certainly there, top three minimum. And then after that, it's kind of a scramble, which we also predicted. I don't really have a whole lot more to add to it. I guess, if you have any other guys that you want to chime in on, you go ahead.
It's those three right now. I just, first of all, Chase now being back, I'm definitely interested to see how that goes in the next couple months. I thought at Martinsville it seemed like he was just stuck back in traffic for most of the race and probably just getting his rhythm back. And then that run he made at the end was really impressive, especially considering how hard it was to pass. And I don't really expect him to be much of a factor next week. I kind of think, with what he's dealing with, kind of have the feeling he'll just sort of ride around in the back, and then Dover will be when we really see, just how much he's back into rhythm, because that is arguably his best oval track. Actually, I wouldn't even say arguably; it absolutely is. For Byron, something I noticed, and this was kind of a recurring theme last year, was he only had a certain number of top tens, and yet had the 2 wins early in the year. Was one of the most dominant drivers for a certain period of time. I think he was like top 2 in laps led still for whole regular season, albeit a lot of that being because of short tracks having more laps. But we heard it all summer with him. Oh, look, he only has 4 or 5 top 10s or whatever, and people treated that like he's having some bad year. And all I can say is I just hope to whatever powers they may be that doesn't happen again this year, because right now he's only got 3 top 10s. 2 of them are wins. I think all 3 are top 5s, but he leads the entire series in average running position. And let's see. Yes, he also leads in XARP, expected average running position. So, no matter how you slice it, he's been at worst a top 3 driver this year, arguably number 1. And all I hope for is that he doesn't go through like another one of those long stretches of no top 10s and bad luck and everything, because then all of a sudden, those results fundamentalists are going to be saying, he's not that good, or, he's basically the same as Alex Bowman and not even close to Chase or Larson. Or it's just, you can't watch these races and see a guy dominate multiple weeks and, say he's just a barely above average driver or whatever. So, just need to get that out real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I do get annoyed by it as well. I can't say that I have the same desire to see him do extremely well as you do because, in kind of the same way that, Larson and Chase are kind of respectful rivals for us. Byron's kind of a rival for me in that being an Alex Bowman fan, I get tired of hearing the weakest Hendrick driver stuff, which I'm the one that creates a lot of that. I understand, but that's just kind of a little petty thing I have. But, you have to give him credit. He's done what he has this year, and he's earned it. It deserves his success, and you have to give him for that. And he's certainly proving a lot of people wrong. I was going to ask Chad, do you follow any of the analytics stuff? Or
I do a little bit. I'm not as in depth as you or as Ryan or Sean or most of you guys, but I agree with Byron being a strong driver. But yes, I mean results do mean something because that's how they count the points to become to the playoffs and advance to be the champion. So, yeah, I mean, like his teammate Jason Larson, he's just got to do that, do what he's done this year and convert it into wins and top fives rather than just having a really good race and then whether it's his fault or something with the car or something with the crew, end up 15th to 20th. Just, race for 3 hours and get, nothing out of it, really.
I mean, he did, I think, benefit slightly from Chase not being around just because of the fact, that's one less really strong driver that he's got to go up against at his own team. Just like it's probably helped Larson as well and even Bowman to an extent. But still, as we said, minimum top 3 driver this year. And, yeah.
See, it's funny. I kind of don't really consider Byron like a rival to Chase like I do with Larson because Chase and Larson both kind of came up at the same time and, were these 1A, 1B best driver of the next generation. And Byron was a bit later than that and had a slower start in Cup and to the point where infamously in just like his 3rd race ever, somebody in our chat group declared him a bust, which was led to one of the funniest sort of in-joke interactions that we've ever had on our server that don't need to go into, but people kind of gave him a hard time for a while and still do for not developing as quickly or not getting the results. So, I've never really considered him, a threat to Chase like that, and I don't think he will. I think if Chase and Larson are like the Jimmy and Gordon or Tony Stewart level guys of this generation, I think Byron's more of like a Matt Kenseth, which is a very good career. I think he's a future champion, probably. Just probably not like a future, multi-time best driver of the year juggernaut type.
So would you say his rivals right now are probably more like based on when they came up, like Bell or Reddick?
Larson and Reddick are pretty clearly the top 3 talents. And I think Chase and Larson, in my opinion, have both had seasons where they've been the best driver, and I think Reddick is going to have that this year.
Yeah, Byron, for me, kind of feels like a more likable, like, doesn't drive like a dipshit Logano to me, like about that level. And this feels like probably about a 2014 or 15 Logano-type season for him. I think it's probably going to end up as something about like that.
Sort of. I think he's definitely better than Bell, for starters. That's not even a debate to me.
Definitely not for us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Any other guys you want to talk about before we move on to the lower series?
I wasn't going... I think I pretty much just wanted to cover the changes I've been making to my analytics and then where this season stands. So, yeah.
Yeah, I do want to just quickly, I won't call it a shout-out, but just, I guess, a little bit of a credit to a guy that doing the opposite of what he's really been doing in his career, just very quietly doing what he has to in order to, I guess, lend credibility to his Chase bid that he got, from winning the first race of the season. He has been pretty lucky in some of these races, to be fair, but Ricky Stenhouse, I never thought that quietly effective would be a word we used to describe it, but, so far, I can't say I really have any qualms with him being in the chase or qualified for it because he's been very solid so far, and he's been grinding out the finishes that he needs to, and I'll give him credit for that.
Oh, one other guy I just wanted to give a really quick shout-out to who's been making a certain narrative of mine look really good the past couple of weeks, but Todd Gilliland. before the season they told him he wouldn't be running some of the races. It kind of seems likely that he might not be back at Furniture Row next year if they replace him with Zane Smith, but he has been better than his teammate for about the last month or so, and I don't know if that's just a short track thing or if he's really improving, but really kind of validating all of what I've been saying about how Front Row is really a good team at this point, and just hasn't had really the drivers other than rookie John Hunter Nemechek in 2020 to really prove that. So, impressed to see where his career goes from here. I definitely think he's proven at this point that he's a Cup level driver. Yeah.
All right. If that's all that you have on that, I guess we'll just move on to the Truck and Xfinity Series races, which there's not a whole lot to say about them. I mean, the truck event, I'll just say, I saw both those races, or at least a good portion of them. It was another pretty miserable event, kind of akin to Daytona. There's a lot of fits and starts and never really getting a flow, and then just an ending where everyone kind of just wanted it to be over. And then the Xfinity race wasn't terrible, but, it was mostly just the 20 car of Nemechek dominating the whole way, and then really, the most notable thing was him lighting his car on fire and the burnouts afterwards. But other than that, it was another race where, kind of going back to the point we made earlier in the show about the Cup race, it was the opposite, where there was just too many cautions and too many things that were just slowing the race up, and it had no kind of rhythm to it. And, like I said before, if the racing's good, I'd rather not have that kind of staccato rhythm to a race, and have things just happen naturally and not have all these long delays. But it wasn't bad, but there's not really a whole lot for me to say about either of them. I mean, I guess probably one of you guys will bring up Hocevar, maybe the only noteworthy thing about the truck race, but other than that, I don't have a lot to add.
Just Carson Hocevar should be suspended for that bullshit. And B, Joe Graff Jr., why does this guy have a NASCAR license? And one of the worst drivers in any of the top 3 series since he's shown up, and now he decided to mess with Ryan Ellis, who is my homie. Not just because we have the same first name, but I actually, as a kid, I raced at the go-kart track that he used to race at, and he would show up there from time to time and just race with people. So I've met him multiple times.
And one of his sponsors actually follows us on Twitter. Fun fact.
Oh, wait, he follows us? No.
No, not his sponsors. One of his sponsors.
Yeah. But, anyway, nobody fucks with Ryan Ellis, and especially not one of, if not the worst driver in any of the top 3 series, and he can go away.
Yeah. I made my famous comment about him, or at least famous among our community, about him last year, so there's not really anything to add. Do you have anything, Brian? Did you see the races, or?
I saw the Xfinity race. Unfortunately, I posted this when it happened. My FS1 froze for me with 20 laps to go just before the green flag.
Yeah.
So I missed the end of the race. I missed I saw it on YouTube the next morning, but the literal burnout. And yeah, I was really hoping that Custer was going to pull one out at the end there, especially with what happened.
He's looking better, definitely. Not the easiest start, which I think can mostly be chalked up to that team being kind of brand new again. And just a reminder, Riley Herbst is driving the car that Chase Briscoe won 9 races with. So I definitely think last couple of weeks Custer has clearly been kind of more of what we expected from him before the year, and it's gonna keep trending that way.
You think so? Monster money can only do so much.
Yep. Yeah, that's the other thing. Herbst has full funding there, and Custer has been sponsored by Haas pretty much every race this year. So
and I don't think it's the kind of HendrickCars.com thing that Larson has a Cup either. So
Haas is taking money off of Kevin Magnussen and Hulk's budget.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a shame.
I'm not trying over to. I like Magnussen. It's all right.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
I guess what I'm kind of hoping for is that with this whole thing that's going on with Front Row, not Furniture Row, as I apparently said earlier, but kind of hoping that, like, Todd Gilliland gets something else, gets away from there, and then some other team snatches Zane up, and they have to go with find somebody else for the 38, and I kind of hope Custer gets that. So, if not that, maybe the 21 for that Harrison Burton currently is driving. I kind of want Todd Gilliland in that car, though. I think
that'd probably be a better option for him.
But yeah, I think Custer just kind of needs to, unless he starts ripping off a ton of wins this year, he needs to get away from that circus that clearly, has two owners who are, not really invested that much, and
whose third priority is NASCAR.
Yeah.
Well, they may not be so bad as kind of Merv has alluded to in our community, that it might not be as bad once it kind of becomes Harvick Childers Racing, I guess, is what he's and some people are predicting. Because you're right, Haas or Tony Stewart do not care anything about this team. It's literally just in title only that this team is called that, or is that. It's
clear that besides Harvick, the only drivers they're putting any priority into are the ones who bring sponsorship. They basically had to. Nobody knows what happened behind the scenes there, but the whole Almirola situation with him coming back for another year, possibly more. That wasn't just. I highly doubt that was him deciding to do that. It was Smithfield wanting to bring him back, and them trying to pump up Herbst as some possible Cup driver, just because he brings money, and Preece is just because he's friends with Harvick. It's Chase Briscoe is basically the only guy that's there on merit right now. That's going to be around for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I still agree with you. I'm just saying that it may not be as bad a situation next year if he can get back to Cup, but if it's a situation, as you said, like where they clearly just don't care about him, then obviously it's best to get away from it. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, Custer is more Haas's guy because he's Joe Custer's son, who's the team president, and I know really buddy with Haas, who simply just doesn't care anymore. So other than basically just slapping his name on the car, that's pretty much all he does.
Well, unless you guys want to say anything else about that, I'll just mention I did not see any of the IndyCar race because they've been doing this thing now for the last couple of years where for some reason they seem to want to go up head-to-head against NASCAR in the same TV window, and all my focus is on Martinsville. I did not see any of IndyCar, and I'm not the biggest follower of it anyways, but I know that you watch it, Chad, and that you follow it too, Ryan, maybe not this particular race, but
I did not watch this race, no, because the NASCAR was on at exactly the same time. But let's
try to watch both at once, and I think that was a mistake because I think I ended up watching neither of them as a result instead of focusing on one specifically. I should have probably DVR'd one, watched the other, afterwards. Just try to avoid the results. With the time thing, I think for the most part, Rogers kept the IndyCar schedule away from NASCAR. It's tough when you have a street race and you have to run at a specific time. It's the biggest deal with Long Beach. Like, I think with Portland and Laguna, like at the end of the year, I think one of the races conflicted with NASCAR, the other didn't. Because I think the Portland ran, I think it was the lead up to the Southern 500 last year. And then Laguna was, I think, at the same time because they wanted to compete because they couldn't compete against Sunday Night Football. Events were big.
Any comments about the race itself? I didn't see it, but obviously I heard there was some kind of controversy with who was it even that got involved in some Illoch or however you say his name.
There was something about Callum.
Well, there's two smaller ones. Yeah, there were two minor ones. The first one which was the first cause of it, was Pato dive bombing Dixon, I think around lap 23 or 24. And Dixon ended up into the tires and took him out of the race, which was a rare DNF for him. That led to the green flag a few laps later where Kirkwood had the lead. Canapino stayed out, which was a weird strategy. One second. All right. And then just as the green flag came out, Ilott came out of pit road to stay on the lead lap. So You had Ilott on, I guess, fresher tires, and Canapino behind him, who was technically the race leader, on dead old tires. I think he drove like 16th or 17th in the first stint. And that's when the leaders on fresh tires, and most of them were on their green tire run, were just trying to get around everybody. And that's where the chaos happened. Oh, and Elio stayed out too. That's right. That's the other problem.
I missed all that, but I just saw like Ilott was apparently getting death threats from, which I guess shouldn't be too much of a surprise given how much the people who probably were rooting for Canapino, are the same people who, have literal riots when their soccer team loses. So
I don't know if Ilott had a problem, he had to come back to pit road for something, but it was just a weird situation that team rushed Ilott back onto the track just as the race went back to green, which is what caused the issue, along with Canapino staying out on a wacky strategy.
Yeah, anyway, I was sort of surprised to see that Kyle Kirkwood won. I know he won the pole, but
he won the pole.
He's been getting a lot of. I know Sean's listening right now. He's been kind of the mean one on our server, but I think people in general have been a bit down on Kirkwood for how his career has started. But I know he's really hyped up as a prospect, and
last year with Floyd was just a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the cars were terrible. Like, they had to fold the team like halfway through the year because our main sponsor, Rocket, went belly up, and I think Williams and F1 had the same issue that they defaulted on everything. So that was pretty much their entire revenue source.
Yeah, I just know that Kirkwood was crashing a lot last year and kind of overdriving a lot, and it seems like he's very talented, though. Just kind of needs to harness it, and so.
And then Andretti themselves had I think the first two they had a highlight of this before, either during qualifying or before the race, that of their 4 cars, I think, were 7 of the 8 races had incidents. 7, I think the only incident-free race was Herta at Texas, finishing 6th. And they ended up coming back with a win, 2nd place and 4th place. And then Devlin was mid-pack somewhere.
Yeah.
Of the 3 that are
the new
legitimate guys, it was 1, 2, and 4.
Yeah. So I just know that Marcus Ericsson is now leading the points by a pretty decent amount because of whatever happened with Pato. So looks like we're in for another one.
In that melee with Ilott and Canapino, Pato and Kirkwood bumped to sidewalls, and Pato got the worst of that one. Pato actually spun out in the middle of traffic and somehow didn't get collected.
It's hard to just. What I was just saying is it's kind of hard to take IndyCar points seriously until after the 500 with the double points and all that. But
don't think they're doing double points anymore for the 500.
I thought that was after. I thought that was starting next year.
I'll double check right now, but I don't think so.
Anyway, still though, I mean it's kind of a bit early in the season, but I just saw Avery, who's been on this show once last year, posted some kind of estimated average running position for IndyCar, and Ericsson was 7th. So, yeah,
that's right.
Classic Ryan Newman trolling going on there that hopefully doesn't last.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it real quick. If I don't find it next minute or two, we'll hash it out later.
Is there any F1?
Oh, there we go. I found it. An Indy Star article from February that they took out the double points for the 500.
Oh.
So it's they did do top 12 qualifiers get points 12 to 1. It's not crazy, but that's the incentive this year, I guess. The winner can get 65, I think.
It's still the most highest point-paying race.
Yeah.
So that's generally when I think you can kind of start, really looking at the championship picture there.
And then at that point, the races come thick and fast as compared to this time of year where technically been racing for 7 weeks and they just had 3 races. And they're off this week.
Yeah. Jake, was there any F1 or anything for you to talk about? Or
No, they're on a 4-week break. They're
on spring break. I hope that they haven't been using the beer funnels too much or drinking tequila pyramids in Ibiza, wherever the hell they go.
Yeah.
Bars, they probably have the money to do that.
Yeah.
At least Lewis does.
Yeah. Yeah. None of that going on yet. I don't really have, like I said, anything to add to that because I didn't see the IndyCar race other than, the thing about, everyone knows, it's stupid to make threats to someone over a sporting event or whatever, but so I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen with NASCAR or racing series like that because I know that it has, but it's not really as surprising because there's a lot of overlap between a lot of kind of people that watch open wheel racing and people that, as Brian said, act like hooligans at other sporting events. And, it's just a shame. Like, I still remember, not to get into a big thing about this, but, like after the Abu Dhabi 2021 thing, there were people that, there were so many, I think, death threats or, just threats in general that were made to Nicholas Latifi that he and his girlfriend actually had to hire personal security, around the clock for their safety afterwards. And, and now we've got this, and we saw apparently got so bad that several of the other IndyCar drivers spoke out about it. And again, anybody with any sense knows that it's stupid, but, we have to understand that this is just a game, and it can be very hard to take it too seriously, and, I've certainly been guilty of it. We've all been guilty of it, and we've said some things that we regret or whatever, but, at the end of the day, it's like a thing where, in 2016, it still grieves me to this day that Dylan Lupton or the 32 car or whatever came out and did what he did at Homestead and brought out that caution that screwed everything up and cost Carl Edwards a title and led everything else. But I would never, I didn't send death threats to him or make any kind of stupid thing like that. And the same thing happened, like I said, with Latifi, and now apparently it's happening here. And it's just stating the obvious, but don't do that. And it's best to just keep, like my parents say, inside thoughts. You're not supposed to be outside. Keep them in. So there's nothing really else to add but that, I guess.
Said it well.
All right. Anything else that you guys want to cover?
Talladega on Sunday.
Yeah, and possibly Dover. We can maybe go over that a little too.
Just our usual preview. Since Talladega is Talladega, it's pretty much always a bit of a, there's obviously some skill to it, but it's, for the most part, very hard to predict. I'm just going to say Ryan Blaney will finally get another win. Just kind of a gut feeling.
I'll pick one for Jake. I'm going to go with Bowman.
Yeah. As far as the race in general, I think it'll be a good race about in line with what we've seen so far at Talladega, and I kind of hope it is that way because we haven't seen too much shit showery in the two races we've already had at Talladega with this new car, thankfully, that had gotten so accustomed to seeing. And it comes at a little bit of a cost because, largely that's because we've only kind of had two usable lanes of racing for the most part, not having like the usual 3 wide action. It's kind of difficult to really make your way up through the pack if you're not already near the front of it, and so that's a little bit of a bummer, but it's a worthy trade-off, I guess, and it definitely seems to reward the drivers that are really good at it. We've definitely had more fair results, kind of like in Atlanta, like the kind of result you would expect. The pick that I made before the season, and I guess I'm going to stick with it even though there's not really a good reason to, is somebody that we haven't really mentioned much in our shows this season that's had, frankly, a really disappointing season, is A.J. Allmendinger. Now, he hasn't had a good year, and I think a lot of that is because I don't think he really wants to be driving full-time for Colin, to be honest, which we've already kind of spent enough time in this show. We may talk about that in the future in another episode, but he is a solid super speedway racer, and he made a really great, one of the best moves I've ever seen to win the Xfinity race in fall last year, which I know that's Xfinity, but still. But really, like Ryan said, you can't really make a great prediction for anybody at Talladega because it is so random. Law of averages dictate that we're going to have a big incident here since we didn't have one the last two races that's going to shake things up. And there's just so many other factors you can't predict. So I doubt that actually happens, but it's the pick that I made in the preseason, and I'm sticking with it. And I'll just briefly mention then that the race after that, of course, is at Dover Motor Speedway, which that just sounds really wrong, but it is what it is now. So you guys got anything to say about that one?
I think it kind of rolls off the tongue. We're just not used to it. But
I think Dover's going to be should be a Hendrick fest for those who like Hendrick.
Like I said earlier, and definitely, I think
between how powerful they are and how good they've been the past couple of years on the concrete tracks, Dover and Nashville.
Yeah. Like I said, that's going to be the race where I think I really put a lot more stock into how Chase runs, because how good he is there, and if he's running top 5 there, contending to win, or even absolutely win, then I think he's going to have probably a really good season. If he's still struggling there, though, then it might be a bit longer than expected before he gets back to being the Chase Elliott that we all know. So
the way the system is now, he just needs to pick off one by in the next 4 months. And
via Larry Mack, he needs to pick up.
In a Hendrick car, even with 7 fewer races, he'll be in the top 30. So once you do that, then
actually that doesn't even matter anymore.
Yeah,
top 30 thing.
Top 30 doesn't matter anymore.
Nope.
Okay.
I took that away this year, but I think he could still point in.
Well, I was going to say, via Larry Mack, he has to average gaining 7.5 points on 16th place per race to make it in.
He'll probably do that with stages alone if he runs well enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would obviously much rather he win his way in, but I think unless it's like last year when we had 15, 16 different winners, I think it's very realistic that he could point in still.
We have how many? Well, he has to face Reddick now every time in a road course. But he's got what? 1, 2, 3? Yeah, 3 more courses between now. Oh, 4 Chicago. I forgot about that.
Well, last year he won 5 races and none of them were on road courses. So
he's due one then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As far as that race goes, we had our best Dover race there in a long time last year. That was one of the best highlights of the new package that we had. Definitely one of the most praiseworthy races because if you having seen all the Dover races I have, that felt like pretty much a miracle, and I was really glad to see. I don't think this will be as good as that one was, but I think it'll still be decent. And I certainly think it's going to be the best chance for Alex Bowman to finally shine and get his turn, which he hasn't really gotten so far this year. Even though he's been consistently decent, he hasn't really had winning speed in any event. And he won there 2 years ago, which even though it was kind of lucky, he still put himself in position. And then last year, he was one of the fastest cars, but got screwed over on a caution, I think, that came out in the middle of a pit sequence. So I'm looking forward to that being an opportunity for him. And I picked him in our preseason challenge. And so I hope that holds to be true. And yeah, like Chad said, it will probably be a strong track for Hendrick in general. Not really a whole lot else to add about it. So I guess that's it.
Yep.
Sounds good.
All right. So that's probably all that you had to say about anything, right?
Yep.
All right. I'll wrap up things then. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of the TRC podcast. Thanks to Chad's Hair Plugs. I keep making that mistake. For being on with us again today. Appreciate it. We should be on back again in 2 weeks, but I don't want to promise things and guarantee that something couldn't come up. But our plan is to go every 2 weeks and maybe do 1 extra week in the middle of the season. But our plan is to be here after Dover. And we'll look forward to see what we have between now and then. And hopefully some interesting storylines and a little bit more positivity from the gallery. But until then, thank all you guys for your support. Be sure to like and subscribe to us on YouTube and leave a comment. That helps us more than anything in the algorithm. Tell us about something you might like for us to talk about, or just a general comment. You have a suggestion or a question that you want to ask us. And follow us on Twitter at TRC Podcast 1. Follow Ryan on Twitter at RJM Analytics. He's got a lot of great stuff. More detailed analysis of some of the things we get into here that we can't really talk in the depth that he can in his written stuff that he has there. So be sure to check that out. And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.